3 weeks ago, the Süddeutsche Zeitung, big German newspaper, opened up with "The world is rising. Die Welt steht auf." Bit of an unusual titling for the Süddeutsche Zeitung. And above it, most importantly, was a picture of masses demonstrating in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. A picture that is an echo of the iconic pictures that we've seen in '89 when the wall came down. Same perspective, masses demonstrating in front of the wall. What happened 2 weeks ago? What makes the Süddeutsche title "The world is rising"? Well, you know it. Millions of people went into the street to demand more action against climate change, to address the urgent issues, plastic waste, circularity. A third of the people that were there were in Germany, 2 of them my daughters, by the way, and clearly something that made the world buzz. I don't feel the same buzz perhaps as in 1989 when the Iron Curtain came down, but it's something that's in the air, and clearly that's a big mover for the chemical industry. At the same time, digital goes on. So let me ask you one quick question. What do you think was the most downloaded app in the year 2006? Any idea? Which app was it? WeChat? Any other guesses? 2006, most frequently downloaded app? This was a trick question. The iPhone was invented in 2007. But it has invaded our lives so much that we can't imagine living without it, and that we can't even imagine the history without it. It has changed the way we collaborate. It changes the way we look for information, the way we buy stuff, the way we communicate. We sleep next to it, at least I do. We have left it into our private lives, which have deeply disrupted it. I wonder, has it also in your company, in the same way, disrupted you do your business life, the way you communicate, 2006 versus today? I would argue the answer is probably no. And these 2 things, I think, bring our industry, the chemical industry, to a crossroads, which is a really important point where we can either turn left and do what we've done for the last 50 years, and I would argue get marginalized, or embrace these things and turn right and come up with a new way to reinvent ourselves, building on the core strength that we already have. And I want to discuss this with you very briefly this morning in 4 steps. Firstly, let's discuss a little bit why this is so difficult for us. And secondly, how can we embrace digital technology within given functions of our companies, between different functions, makes it a little more complicated, and how can we embrace it to create new businesses, the most complicated. 4 steps. But before we get there, why is this so difficult? First of all, I think we don't get enough credit as chemical industry for the value that we're really creating before we beat ourselves up. So the good news is, if you would have invested 100 euro in, say, telecom industry in 2000 and put 100 euro in the chemical industry in the year 2000, this is not a trick question, the telecom industry was already there in 2000, what would you have made in 2018? Any guesses? 100 euro telecom industry to 2018? 150? 164. If you put 100 euro in the chemical industry in the year 2000 to 2018, where would you be? 250? 511. The chemical industry has created enormous value over the last 2 decades. And few people, ourselves included, don't really recognize that. And that was prior to the financial crisis, during the financial crisis, and after. And you could argue, yeah, but now we're entering a down cycle. I'd say we still have a very strong foundation upon which we can create enormous value. But then there are 3 things that make it a little more tricky for us. Number 1, we are an enormously asset-heavy industry, and we're locked in with our asset. By the time you've put 100 million, $500 million, $1 billion into a ground to have a certain plant, it's kind of difficult to change this around real quick. Tesla last week uploaded over the air the version 10 of their software, and they can do this like this. Kind of difficult to come up with a new polymer once you've got the plant in the ground. But, of course, it also gives us protection. Once you have that running, it's more difficult for somebody to come in. So acid heavy, difficult to move around, okay? Second, we get more and more innovation averse. That's a bit of an issue. If you look at the R&D investments of chemical industry in the last years, certainly in Europe, US, you see it going down. By the way, at the same time in China, massive increase in R&D. That alone, I think, should all alarm bells make go off. And why is this? If you ask around, people would say, yeah, we're not going to see any new polymers. We haven't seen any new polymers around in 20 years. This time is over. Sounds a little bit like the human pharma industry also in the 2000s. No more blockbusters. We can't find any more. What has the human pharma industry done? They went into adjacent industries, created ecosystems. Today, diabetes, everybody has the cell phone thing and the diagnostics around it. You have seen human pharmaceutical industry moving into eyesight, into other areas. They've reinvented themselves, and by going into, for example, antibodies, the biospace, they've actually found a way back to define mechanisms to come to new blockbusters. So what can we learn from that? Maybe the future is not in new polymer backbones, but maybe it's in the way we come up with composites. We take these climate change and resource scarcity things to think of ways of more in circular ways and more efficient ways to synthesize our products, come up with bio-based solutions. That's, I think, where the solution space. And, of course, then digital will play a key role there as well. So problem number one, acid base, innovation issue. And number three, it's very long life cycles. So by the time we come up with the technology, we prove it ourselves, we built a plant, we've proven it, we've got regulatory approval, we're talking 5 to 10 years, and then our customers are also locked into their acid base. So it's not unheard of that we have an innovation coming up from 5 to 10 years until we really make something out of it. So we could say, okay, that's it. That's who we are. That's a little bit tough here, but if we get stuck there, I think we'll probably have the Googles and the Amazons and a kid somewhere in a garage in San Francisco coming up with new ways of putting things together in other ways, eat our lunch, and marginalized to be the producer of material while other people put it together with digital applications and come up with better solutions. And that's, I think, where the opportunity is for digital. So let me move to the second part to talk, how do we deploy digital in our industry? And first point there is, how do we do it within a given function? Within a given function, look at manufacturing. We've seen Industry 4.0. We were here last year. We heard a lot about it. Even this morning, there's an army of professional people that can do this really well. You have concepts. I googled it yesterday. I think the McKinsey Quarterly has 400 papers on digital manufacturing. Proven business cases. If you have a pump, you have a microphone next to it, preemptive maintenance, that's all. You can't go wrong. You just have to go do it. What I see is more and more it becomes part of the continuous improvement and lean activities within manufacturing, but it's relatively clear. What's not so clear is how do you embrace digital transformation in R&D? Because there's a million things that you could be doing. It's not as repetitive. And the question is, how do you make any value there? Within DSM, we've run long workshops. We thought about all the things that we could be doing. And we ended up with 3 things that we want to focus our digital efforts within R&D. The first is automation. The second is modeling. And the third is data analysis and AI, which means by exclusion, we don't do anything else. These are the core themes. And within that, there's a couple of iterations. And let me give you an example in how these things have disrupted the biotechnology way of doing R&D, which is mind-blowing. It truly is something, if you look at it in detail, what happened there. Because the way you come up with the new organism in biotechnology is this classical, what they call engineering cycle. You design a new microbe first. Typically, the scientists would sit down and say, maybe I'll take this gene and make it a little bigger, or whatever. And then you build your microorganism, you test it, you learn from the insights, and then based on that, you go through the cycle again and design a new one. Today, best practice in biotechnology, the scientist comes in, switches on the computer, and there is an AI surface that says, we've looked at the sequence of the organism that you want to optimize today. There's 200 genes known in the pathway of your interest. And here's what we'll do. We'll upregulate all of them or downregulate and come up with the most promising solutions. If you have any other ideas, click here. Other than that, here are the 1,000 strains that we're going to do. 1,000. And by the way, I will move then forward to another software module that calculates, this software, by the way, was taken from the engineering industry, from the electronic cycle industry, because the electronic cycles of transistors and all is the same principle, fundamentals of a cell, where you switch on and you switch off stuff. So you can essentially take this and apply it here, and then translate this into another software that automatically translates upregulating this gene into the base pair. Here is the promoter that we're going to do. This is the base sequence. And that then goes to the next robotization, that goes to the fridge and picks out the plasmids. We already have that. This we don't have. We sent an email to the robot of the plasmid synthesizer who does it next door, and they then synthesize it, send it back. All of this is automated. And then we incubate the organisms also in a robot and test them. And there, digitization and miniaturization has led to the fact that we used to work with 96 well plates. Today, through smart ways of handling liquids, you go down to nanoliters. You don't pipette anymore. You use essentially ultrasound to produce small droplets of nanoliter size that put together your new probe. This way, you can actually handle these thousands of samples that you test. And then the hot thing in biotech at this stage is modeling, but not of a single pathway, but of the entire organism. So some of you may remember biological pathways. As a student, it was in my room, this giant thing with the citric circle in the middle of all the things that are going on in the cell. This thing, in real time, with color marking, where is the bottlenecks, what's going on. And we can do this today. And that gives you an immediate insight, where should my next iteration go? So modeling, big data, and what am I missing? Big data, automation are the three things that disrupted every of these three steps to a point that we can do the cycle much faster and in much larger volumes. So the insights that we gain are really disruptive there. And now you can think, what does it mean for materials? Before I go into the lab, do I run a model? And we have these models, of course, on all time and length scales, from picoseconds to years, from nanometers to meters, depending on what you need. All of these things, of course, evolving very, very quickly. Then it's not so much a question anymore of, is the model available? The question is, are the people embracing that way of working? It's another important point. So much to applying digital within a function. Now, applying digital between functions is a little more tricky because it's messier. There's more people, nobody's really responsible. By the way, if you apply digital within a given function, it's typically to increase efficiency. So that goes to your bottom line. If you apply digital between functions, very often it's initiatives that go for growth because you make the information available to have a difference for the customer. So there's your top line aspect, and then when you have new businesses, that's a new thing altogether. So digital between functions for us is primarily knowledge management. It's a big subject. The way externally the knowledge of mankind evolves is exploding. You probably know half of mankind's knowledge was generated after January 1, 2019. So you kind of wonder, what does it make sense in school that we learn if knowledge is exploding so fast? But it also means, from a scientific perspective, nobody can read all these articles and embrace them anymore. We need smart mechanisms and machines and algorithms, semantic search, things of that nature, that help us to deal with all of this flux. And there's a lot of work that we invest internally to make this external information digestible and relevant for our scientists. But also internally, there's studies, there's a McKinsey study that says 20% of the time of a researcher is lost because they just simply don't have access to the certain knowledge that they would do to run their experiment. Or other people say half of the R&D time in chemical industry is a repeat of stuff that people have done before, but it's not documented. You don't get access to this. So knowledge management is really an enormous leverage to liberate your knowledge and make it available within your function, but more importantly, to the marketing people, to the customer-facing people, and build on it. Honorable mention in this context: there has to be a balance between making the data free flow and available and protecting them. So cybersecurity is a major issue that we can't really cover today, but it's an incredible balance that you have to strike if you want to do this well. And you better have a cybersecurity expert on the table on day one before you do anything in system design, because it's beautiful if you come up with a wonderful solution. And at the end of the day, cybersecurity comes in and says, that's all great, and we can't do it because they win. Thirdly, using digital for new businesses. That's really where the fun is. It's also the most difficult. There's a recent survey that says 95% of the executives in the German chemical industry think that within 3 years, their company will offer digital-based solutions around their product. So it's big. Everybody's talking about it. And yet, when you actually look this incremental sales that we gain today and what we see, it's a bit of an imbalance there. I'll give you 3 examples where we've been playing with it in DSM, and I can tell you some of those went really well and others were wrestling. The first and my favorite is additive manufacturing. If there's any segment where this convergence of digital with materials, with hardware comes together and can disrupt in major ways, it's additive manufacturing. And it's also, if there's any way where we prove that we marginalize to be materials supplier while other people get the big price, it's that. So why am I saying that? 3D manufacturing, of course, has 3 elements that come together. It's the material, it's the printer, so there's a hardware element and maybe AI, and then there's the software. Now, the beauty of this is, depending on what segment you go, you can approach things totally different as a material supplier. So I don't know if you know, UPS is one of the largest investors in 3D printing. Any idea why? If your vacuum breaks and you need a spare part, the vision of UPS is in their distribution centers, where these 3D printers are, chances are a block away from your house. You send an email and say, I need part number so and so and so. And then we don't have anybody on Amazon going to a store where there's 10,000 parts of all the vacuum cleaners ever produced. All UPS is to do is go to one bag of resin, put it into their 3D printer, print it out, send it to you, half an hour later you got it. The disruptive potential from a supply chain is amazing. Question is this a game that we want to play? Don't know. But then look at sneaker industry, shoes. At this stage, a sneaker is made, I think, in 6 different steps: upper, middle sole. Now imagine you go to a shop, you have a 3D view of your foot, and on the spot, in a mass customization, you get a sneaker with your material, with your design, by the way, that you put on there, that it gets printed out in 1 step. What will you be willing to pay for that? And is that an area where, as chemical industry, maybe we want to tie a partnership with Nike or somebody? So depending on where you go, disruptive potential is enormous, but it means you really have to embrace ecosystems in ways that as chemical industry we've hardly ever done. It's risky, it's messy, and in instances will fail. Another example that's a fun one for us, it's our Niacha business. Niacha is again spelled backwards. So if you write the word again and you read it backwards, it reads Niacha. And what is special about Niacha, it's our business where we really want to disrupt by come up with new recyclable materials. You know what is the second largest single volume contribution of landfills in the US? Mattresses is number 3. Number 1 is diapers, and number 2 is carpet. Because carpet typically can't be recycled because you've got polyester and polyamide and different elements coming together. And then if you shred it, it's a mess. But if you think through and you come up with ways to have carpets out of one material, perhaps in smart ways to click and unclick materials together, suddenly you've got a concept that really has the potential to disrupt an industry that's been doing this forever. But they're not waiting for you to disrupt you. So you need deep insight about the chemistry. That's where we're really good at as chemical industry. But then you need to have an ecosphere of carpet machines. We know nothing about carpet machines. And you need the digital capability to understand how does your supply chain work? How does all these elements come together? So that's one of those areas where you're like, wow, maybe that's a bridge too far. But if you think of it, the potential to leverage our materials insights on this is endless. We started actually with carpets. Now we're into mattresses, and there are whole other things that we feel we can be doing based on that aspect. Last element is our business for solar cells. And we actually started with coating. And some researcher said, this is cool, I have a coating that I could on glass and museum pictures. And we're like, yeah, this is great, we can do this, it's anti-reflective, it's fantastic. And we developed it, and then somebody said, has anybody calculated how much the world market is for coatings for museum glass? That was a bit of a disappointing number. And we said, maybe we can use this technology somewhere else. And that then led to our business for anti-reflective coatings of solar cells. Actually, it's post installation. So you have a solar cell on your roof. You can come to us and we have a solution where you spray stuff on it, and afterwards you get 4% more electricity out of your sun because the coating is less reflective. So the question now is, what are we going to sell here? Are we going to sell a bottle of stuff that you do and put it on your solar cell? Or are we going to sell modules? Or are we going to enter into an ecosphere with module manufacturers, take a stake on it, and give the whole infrastructure for free, but charge 2% of the incremental value that we generate with the higher electricity yield? Fantastic questions, but none of these feel really good territory for us as chemical industry. So that's where, again, this question of conversion becomes very critical. And my point is, we should not see digitization as an individual aspect that we use to transform our business. If we do that, I think we don't get the full value. We need to embrace it in the context with new ecospheres that we establish and with new ways of managing, partnering with startups, and building new competencies. We've started in DSM building a new scientific competence on behavioral sciences. People declared me crazy when they came and said, we need behavioral sciences in our R&D group. Why do we need behavioral sciences? Because now we become more consumer-oriented, and we need to understand how you take decisions upon what you buy and what you put into your body. And the design of these aspects are critical if you want to be successful, or at least so that you know how other people who you collaborate talk to you, and you should be able to judge what that means. So we had 4 core lessons, if you want to, out of this whole digitization, reflecting on our journey a little bit. The first one was, it's easy to be said, was more difficult. The data are, in fact, our raw material, and we've painfully neglected keeping our data clean and making them fair. You all have heard this acronym, findable, accessible, So nourish your data, make sure your organization treats them as what they are, which is the true core essence of your company. Secondly, don't get stuck in the curse of pilots. When you start with digitization, everybody has an idea. I'll do this, I'll do that. But it's very easy to get stuck in everybody does a little bit. You extract the value when you bring it to scale. So do not get caught in the curse of piloting. And you do that, thirdly, by understanding that digitization is not the job of a couple of nerds in the dark room next door. It's change management. It needs everything change management needs. Top senior management support, talking about it, giving demos, inspiring the people, get it into people that they actually start use the modeling, that they actually embrace this and develop new ideas. Took us a little while to figure that out. Change management is at the core of making that work. And lastly, that may sound easier than it is, there's a billion things that you could be doing here. I've seen billions of dollars wasted of initiatives that sounded really cool, and we did them because we could. Only do the initiatives where you have an immediate path to return. Otherwise, you'll get lost, and chances are you'll waste a lot of money. So in conclusion, I said initially the chemical industry for me is at a crossroads, and I really mean that. We had our first golden era of chemical industry after the war. Feedstocks prices down, markets were booming, new polymers were invented every other day, fantastic. If we want to come up with another golden era and not be marginalized to raw material supplier while Google gets, or Amazon or anybody else gets the big price, we need to converge our conventional strength and add to this, embracing digital technology, new ecospheres and partnerships, and new ways of managing. Keeping in mind, coming back to the climate change, I think as industry, we don't only have an opportunity to capitalize on it, we have a responsibility to put our forces to work to make that happen. And if we get it right, I think we have a really bright future as chemical industry. Thank you.